Before we dive in and look directly at the Pro app, I'd like to give you a little bit of an idea about the background behind it and why we've come to build it. I was fortunate growing up. I was able to represent England boys and England men's teams before ultimately playing some of the mini tours around the world. I'd always use stats programs myself to help analyse my game and structure my training as well. The more I played, the more shortfalls I saw in the programs that were out there, in that a lot of the traditional stats weren't telling me an accurate picture of my performance. And even some of the more modern stats were falling into that bracket as well. From that, I decided to approach it very much from the player's side as opposed to the traditional maths, science, stats background, and just ask what were the questions that I wanted answered from an analysis point of view. And from that, I was able to then build some customised performance metrics that I then tested myself for the few years that I was still playing on the tour, and then ultimately showed some of those to managers, players on the European PGA Tour who liked what they saw, and I began working with them on their analysis. I like to think of analysis as different levels to it. So you'd have level 1, ultimately the score, so +5. Level 2 would be the comparison measures, the typical sort of strokes gain stats that you see now. So in our example on the right, the player shot 5 over. This is then broken down into tee shots, approach play, short game and putting. And we see that the player lost 3.5 of those 5 strokes on the tee shots. This gives us a decent start in that we know, okay, that we've not drove the ball very well from the tee, but it isn't telling us why that number is what it is. And if we're going to improve it, we need to know why that is. Level 3 is some of the deeper stats and performance measures. And this is where I saw some quite big shortfalls in the traditional stats programs that are out there. So, for example, we might want to see where the misses were they in water, were they out of bounds, were they just off the fairway. There's a big difference in those misses. And also what direction they were, where they left, where they right. The only way to do that accurately is to actually know what the player's target is as well. That was something that no app was currently doing until we've built Upgame Pro. So if we look at the difference between level 2 and level 3, level 2 is saying we're not very good from the tee. Level 3 then breaks that down and says the reason you're not very good from the tee is you've hit 3 tee shots into penalty positions such as water or out of bounds. You've had 5 other misses in what I call major positions, in effect where you're having to just chip out and advance the ball down the fairway. And we also see of the misses, 90% of them were 20 yards or more left of the target. So we go from level 2, knowing the player's not very good off the tee, to level 3, knowing he's not very good off the tee because he's got a big left miss going on that is putting him in some very costly positions. That, as a player and a coach, is the real valuable information that we're looking to get to. If we look quickly at some of the traditional stats that you may be familiar with in golf, things like driving accuracy. If we look on the left image, you'll see 2 blue dots. The bottom one is one I've topped the ball 100 yards, but it's hit the fairway. By driving accuracy stat, I get a tick for that. It looks a good drive. Another drive, Rory McIlroy has hit one 350 yards to that top blue dot, but it's rolled a yard off the fairway into the rough. Driving accuracy would give him a cross for that and say, no, that's not a good drive. I think everyone knows that that top blue dot is a lot better position than that bottom blue dot. This is where strokes gained off the tee helps us, and it takes distance into account when calculating it, but the shortfall then comes in strokes gained off the tee is it doesn't calculate the misses very well. And this is the same for driving accuracy. A miss in that top position, a yard off the fairway, counts exactly the same as a miss out of bounds or a miss in a water hazard on the driving accuracy stat. Strokes gained off the tee helps combat that somewhat, but it still only recognises if the ball is in the fairway, the rough or the sand. For example, if you look at the orange dot on the left, you could be in the rough but behind a tree and have to just chip it up the fairway. In that case, you'd actually lose on strokes gained approach, not strokes gained off the tee, which again becomes quite misleading. You look better off the tee than you actually are, and you look worse on approach shots than you actually are. Green in regulation is another stat that's similar to that. I could hit the green to 2 foot, I could hit the green to 40 foot. There's obviously a big difference between the quality of those two shots, yet they both count the same. Similarly, I could miss in the fringe, or I could miss over the cliff into the water. Green in reg classes those both the same. Strokes gained approach helps combat that, in that if you miss it over in the water, you get penalty shots. But again, because it only recognises the distance and the lie of the ball, it can't distinguish on the miss. If it's 15 yards in the rough, you could have a very easy chip shot. You could similarly have an almost impossible lob shot. Again, this is where it mixes the categories, and you might lose shots in strokes gained short game, when really it's nothing to do with your short game ability, it's to do with missing your approach shots in bad positions. So this is where we need those extra performance measures underneath to sort of make sense of these numbers. Final stats we'll talk about will be putts per round. That is a terrible stat for judging putting performance. If I was to hypothetically hit every green to 40 foot and 2 putt, I would have 36 putts. On putts per round, that would look like a really poor putting day. However, that round would be well above PGA Tour average for a putting performance. Similarly, I could miss every green, chip up to 3 foot on every hole, but miss a few of those 3 footers and have maybe 21, 22 putts. 22 putts sounds like a really good putting round, but if we examine that case against the PGA Tour average, that would actually lose strokes. That would be a poor putting day because you've had a lot of 3 footers and you've missed some. Strokes gained putting is a really good stat for telling putting performance, in that it takes into account the distance of the putt against the PGA Tour make rate from that. It doesn't tell us the speed of the putt though. Have you left it short? Have you hit it past? And again, this is where the Upgame Pro takes it a step further and really gives a good explanation of what those numbers are. We'll now look in the app at some of these real examples.